If you're weighing up the pros and cons of staying on at uni for postgraduate study and can't decide whether it's right for you, get the perspective of someone who's been there and done it in this episode of Future You. Hello and welcome to Future You, the podcast from Graduate Careers Experts Prospects, here to help you achieve your career goals. I'm Dan Mason, and in this episode we're talking postgraduate study. Is it worth it? How different is it likely to be from your undergraduate degree? How do you choose a course and get funding? What impact will it really have on your career prospects? Well, to start answering those questions, we're going to speak to Lottie Jacob, who studied for a Masters in History at the University of Reading. She provides a really interesting take on the experience of postgrad study, which will hopefully be useful for you, whatever your subject and whichever university you're looking to study at. Just before we get started, if after listening to Lottie you want to hear more from the University of Reading, check out their own podcast, Discover Reading, on Spotify, which features conversations with academics, researchers and students. In the meantime, let's get on with the episode.
Hi, I'm Lottie. I'm an Assistant Student Recruitment and Access Officer at the University of Reading. I work organising post-16 school groups and running the Student Ambassador Scheme. When I'm not doing that, I like to come on podcasts.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for joining me on this one. We're here obviously to speak mostly about your experience with postgraduate study, but I think it's probably important just for a bit of context to start by going back a bit further to your undergrad study. So could you tell us a bit about what you studied, where, and what you enjoyed about it, and what your longer term plans were at the time when you were studying at that level?
Yeah, so I was studying history at the University of Reading. I kind of came into the degree with not much idea of what I was doing, apart from the fact I just really liked history. And being at Reading, the history department were amazing. They really nurtured me and helped build my confidence. So I didn't really have any longer term career plans. So when one of my lecturers sat me down and said, look, you've got to start thinking about long term. You're doing well in your degree. Why not think about doing a master's? And I thought, oh, hang on a minute, another year of doing what I absolutely love doing, just to have a bit of time to work out what I want to do further as well. It just, the stars kind of aligned. I'd had a really good time doing my dissertation research at the end as well, and I kind of thought I'd absolutely love to carry that on and continue researching in that capacity. And I just thought, yeah, the skills that I could gain from doing the masters, I feel like, yeah, staying on's the right thing for me right now. But yeah, it wasn't until that conversation midway through third year that postgraduate study had even come onto my radar. Before that, I'd kind of thought about going into some sort of marketing or something like that, using the sort of skills that you gain from doing a history degree, being able to talk about pretty much anything in any capacity. I thought that'd be a good way of using the old gift of the gab, but yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like a very familiar story to me as well as a history graduate myself. So you've spoken about this already a bit, but so was there any consideration of postgraduate study before that meeting, and was it that sparked the interest? And then once you did decide that you wanted to continue with further study, can you tell us a bit about what sort of research you did about courses, how you decided that you wanted to stay at Reading to do the postgraduate study, where you looked into things like funding and all that kind of thing?
It wasn't until that point that I'd taken it as a serious consideration. I toyed with the idea, like, sort of in my second year as well, and I think it's not necessarily the best thing to do, but I was waiting for a bit of validation. I definitely would say, if anyone's in the situation that I was in, don't wait for someone to tell you. If that's what you want to do, just go for it. It was something that had been on my radar before, but then getting that sort of push was what I really needed. I started just doing a bit of a chaotic internet research sort of thing, like how most students would, I reckon. I was looking all around the country, all around the globe at one point, And it wasn't until I'd finished where I actually stopped and started to take it a bit more seriously beyond just like window shopping, I would say, being like, oh, that looks nice, that looks nice. I started looking for courses which had good, strong core modules. So at Reading, there was a module going through different approaches to history and also a module on material culture, which is not something that I'd had the chance to look at before. Those were really strong selling points for me, as opposed to some of the other universities, which were slightly more fluid with their options, which might be good for some people, but for me, I wanted to have that strong structure and then have the freedom to kind of deviate as and when I wanted to. So beyond that internet research, I started like sending out emails to the people who convene the courses and finding out what the day-to-day life was like for students. And I just found that Reading ticked all my boxes. I knew the department, I knew the place, and I really loved it there. So I thought, do you know what? I think I might just stay on. It felt like the right place, the right time. And I know that not everyone gets that sort of gut feeling of like, oh, this is right. But just it ticked the boxes for the core modules, and it just felt right. In terms of funding, I did very last minute with my funding, which I really don't recommend anyone does. I applied for a postgraduate loan. I had not, like I said, I was very disorganized with it, so I kind of assumed it would be like a undergraduate loan where you get your fees paid for and then a maintenance loan. Obviously, I came to the very horrible realization that it was just a flat rate. And that I would have to sort of sustain myself living. But my research was not the most comprehensive, and I definitely, I definitely would recommend thinking about these things sooner rather than later. Getting yourself in a position of being equipped with that knowledge really helps you to know where you're going. So for me, leaving it to the last minute for all of these things, like, it worked out well for me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it would work out well in every situation. I think I got very lucky with the fact that I really ended up loving my course. But I really would recommend for anyone listening to start thinking about these things slightly earlier, or even taking a gap year rather than just jumping straight into things, and consider the other options, because whilst I had alumni discount for the University of Reading, other places might offer you a more substantial scholarship. I think I knew about the alumni discount because I'd been told about it by my lecturer during that initial conversation in my third year. But other places might have offered more substantial scholarships, although that doesn't necessarily mean that's the right place for you. It could just help you carry on as you are.
Yeah, so don't necessarily rely on last minute decisions working out.
No.
But they did in your case, which is great. So
Yeah.
getting on to sort of then the key question that we want to get into today, which is how what the experience of postgraduate study is like and how it differs from your undergraduate study. Could you just talk a bit about that first in terms of the actual academic study, seminars, lectures, workshops, whatever it was in your case, and how that matched your expectations and how it differed from what you'd done before?
Yeah. So one of the first things that the course convener told us on the course was it's not going to be fourth year undergrad, it's first year postgrad, and it really did ring true throughout the whole thing. So I had sort of expected, like I said, fourth year undergrad, a mix of lectures, sort of sitting back and having information told at you, but it's actually a lot more collaborative than that, which at first was a bit terrifying, but I actually found it a lot more rewarding. So we'd have smaller scale seminars was the basis for the history masters that I did, and you wouldn't just turn up and be told what to think. Although at undergrad you shouldn't have had that really either, but it was a very, very strong focus on collaboration,
We know what you
discussion,
mean,
and
I think.
debate. Yeah. So and having your opinion valued as like a colleague rather than as a student, that was something that I wasn't necessarily expecting, but I found very rewarding. So I would say you get a lot more academic freedom as a postgraduate than as an undergraduate, but with that freedom comes a bit of responsibility. So you need to make sure that you've done the reading, you know what you're talking about, and that you've got something to say. So rather than being taught, you're kind of a lot of the work is more discussion based, sort of collaborative, coming together to discuss these issues. But yeah, In terms of wider university life as a postgraduate, I know there's this kind of common misconception that as a postgrad you have absolutely no spare time or no social life. I had a more active social life in my postgrad than I did in my undergrad. We had a really lovely community in the postgrad history department, which was so lovely because we were all going through the same sort of thing. If we were having a bit of a wobbly, we could all just, be there for each other, but equally like be there for the good times as well. You'd have someone to celebrate with. Um, so we had a little postgraduate room where we'd all sit together, we'd do our reading, we'd kind of like float ideas before seminars, and then after seminar we might go out for a drink or two, which was really, yeah, again, really nice to have that sort of, you're not alone in it. And I think most postgraduate courses there is that sort of sense of community just to support you through the extra demands that comes with life as a postgrad. But also another big thing is extracurricular activities. I did have time to be involved in a fair amount of extracurricular activities. Like I somehow ended up doing more in my postgraduate degree than I ended up doing in my undergrad. So, for example, I was a master's student ambassador throughout my whole time doing my master's, and I also was involved in the Reading Scholars Scheme as a course mentor. So I worked a lot in like higher education sort of outreach events, meeting with year 12s and kind of explaining what university was like, and then also attending postgraduate open days. So that was something that I found really rewarding and also a way to kind of mitigate the gap that I found in my own funding. And it was, it was nice to have flexible work around my studies, knowing that, my line manager's not going to tell me to prioritize my part-time work over my studies because they know what it's like. So that was a really nice way of kind of doing something a bit different, feeling like you're giving something back whilst also, supporting yourself through uni. So I found that really rewarding.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's a sort of mix of more collaborative work in terms of your study, a really great community that you built there as well, and then the extracurricular activities on top. So just from what you've said, would you say you found it more enjoyable as a postgrad than an undergrad? It was a kind of a step up in terms of the university experience?
I actually did find that it was a step up in the university experience, yeah. I felt like having more control over my academic side also helped me to feel more confident in myself and to take control over the social side as well. I felt a lot more outgoing and confident, and I took up these opportunities that I otherwise might not have done. Especially the scholars program, which was something that I'd looked at before as an undergraduate and kind of thought, oh, I probably don't have the right skills for that. But then I felt very empowered whilst doing my postgrad degree, then I just went for it. And I actually had such a good time. It's how I ended up in my current role now. So yeah, it just shows that extracurricular activities are like they complement your studies rather than taking anything away. And in my case, it ended up me having a job at the end of it, which is a nice little relief for
Yeah,
me.
absolutely. So just tell us a bit more about that transition from the masters into the job, and then also since you finished the masters, how
Mm,
you've reflected on it in terms of obviously we've talked about how much you've enjoyed it, but what skills do you feel you developed? How that experience has influenced how you now think about your future career, and 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 sort of wrapping that up is sort of
mm.
do you think that it was the right decision and it was all worth it, the cost, the expense, and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I actually found that doing the masters helped me prepared for like the day-to-day stuff for my work day. Balancing multiple deadlines at once is one big thing, as well as time management. As an undergrad, I was a bit fast and loose with my time. I would just sort of do things as I please, like, and then have to cram last minute to get that essay in. But with postgrad, you've got a lot going on. You kind of have to be keeping on top of things, and you do have that support to help you. Like you will be reminded about like reading and stuff, and the fact that your essay's there, and having that community as well in postgraduate study. You don't, no one's gonna like not remind you about the reading if you've forgotten to do it in that sense. But so doing the masters helped me prepare for the workplace by giving me far better time management skills than I had in my undergrad, by helping me prepare for these multiple deadlines. Like you've got different modules on, you've got different readings to do, and if you're like me, if you've got a lot of extracurricular stuff going on, you've got to be doing those as well. also just, I know it does what it says on the tin, but having those extra research skills, the ability to kind of like analyze in depth, quite a broad range of sources with history in that sense. But I now feel a lot more like I don't just with my postgrad, I think it helped me to not just accept things. It helped me to think, hang on a minute, is there a way that this could be done better? Like let me see if this is the right way of doing things, and empowering me to not just accept the status quo, but to be more active in my role. And I think that's really benefiting me now, um, in my current job, which is quite dynamic and ever changing as higher education is. So yeah, I think that's quite it did serve me well in the sense of preparing me for that more faster paced life rather than my very leisurely undergraduate experience looking back on it. Um, but
Yeah, probably
yes.
didn't feel it at the time, but now that having
No, at the
done the
time it
masters.
felt very like, oh God, I've got a seminar later on. How am I going to cope? But then like, now I'm like, I've got meetings here, meetings there. I've got this project to do. But having the masters meant it wasn't quite such a shock going into the workplace. I think if I'd gone straight from undergrad into a full-time role, I might have really struggled. So having that extra, like almost like training wheels for being a big grown up. The masters was for those skills, but I can't recommend doing a master's enough if you feel like that's the right thing for you. There's ways to make the cost affordable. Like I said, doing the extracurricular activities. If you can try and get a part-time work at the university as well.
Yeah, and obviously doing a history degree, a history masters, it's not the subject isn't directly related to the job you're doing now, but from everything you've said there, the skills that you picked up, they're all
Yeah,
relevant. So it's
exactly.
not about
Yeah.
necessarily going postgraduate isn't always about going into something directly related to the degree that you've done.
No, that's the nice thing about doing postgrad is that obviously you're gaining all these skills and you don't have to. I could have gone and done a PhD if I'd wanted to. I had the foundation to do that. It gave me the option to say I could go further into academics or I could use these skills I've gained and go into something completely different. In my case, it was student recruitment and widening participation. But yeah, I wouldn't be in the position that I am today, with this current job if I hadn't done the masters and gained those skills, and gotten the experience of working at the university as a mentor or an ambassador, because that has just really set me up, to be honest, for this current space that I'm in today.
Yeah. So just finally then, you've talked a little bit about your advice in terms of the funding. What other top tips would you give any student who's currently maybe on the fence about doing postgrad study, about whether it's right for them, whether it will benefit their career? What are your thoughts and what's your advice?
I think don't wait for someone to tell you what to do like I did. If you're looking at this course and thinking this sounds really interesting, like this sounds like something that could be worthwhile, I would honestly say I'd push yourself to go for it. Postgraduate study is not the easiest thing. It's definitely a challenge, but I think it's a worthwhile challenge, and all the development will be put to good use. It's not these skills aren't going to evaporate after you've finished. All these skills are there to set you up for the future, and in many cases, it actually ends up opening more doors than closing them. Something else that I think is worth considering is a lot of students feel pressured to step up to the plate and get a master's. They see, oh, my friend's got a master's and they've got this job. Don't go into postgraduate study unless you genuinely want to do postgraduate study. I think, like I said, a lot of people feel pressured to sort of up their CV, but it's not fourth year undergrad or fifth year undergrad in some cases. It's definitely first year postgraduate. It's very challenging. I'm not going to mince my words with this. It's not, you're set up for the skills to do it after having done your undergraduate degree, but unless you feel really passionate about the study that you're going into, unless you feel like you actually care, you're not going to be able to see yourself through. Like, motivation is absolutely key, and make sure that you're looking at postgraduate study for the right reasons, because you don't like it's a time consuming thing to do and it's an expensive thing to do. If it's not it's not something that you just walk yourself into. It's definitely a commitment. I think it's a very positive commitment, and I think you can get a lot of good things out of it, but it is a commitment nonetheless, and I think unless your heart's really in it, it will be a big struggle. So make sure that you're looking at postgraduate study for the right reasons and not just in my case, if I was speaking to a student now and they said, "Oh, I don't really know what to do next," I would say probably take a year off, have some time to think about it. A gap year can be something that's genuinely worthwhile. A lot of my friends ended up taking gap years. One of my friends in my course actually had a 20-year gap year between her undergrad and
Oh,
her
wow. Okay.
postgraduate study. Um, but it's having that time away makes you really think about whether this is the right thing for you, because you might end up at the end of the year being chomping at the bit, being like, I absolutely want to just get started now. But then you might end up having gotten into a different opportunity, a different role maybe, and think, okay, thank God that I kept my options open. I didn't just run into something that would have been quite a heavy thing to have done. So make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons and that you're not just doing it because you feel a bit lost. I know it's scary, the end of university, but I would say it's not like a one size fits all perfect solution to avoiding going into the workplace. It's definitely something that you have to be motivated to do, and it's definitely something that you've got to feel passionate about, because otherwise, like I said, it's a lot of work for something that you don't like feel something for, you know. But yeah, so don't feel like it's like a box you have to tick.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an incredibly rewarding thing to do, but it's definitely
Definitely.
not an easy option.
No,
Just if
no.
you haven't got anything else planned, sort of thing. Brilliant. Well, Lottie, thanks very much for your time.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I hope it's been useful for everyone.
And if Lottie's convinced you that postgraduate study is what you want to do, head over to prospects.ac.uk, where you'll find loads of advice and you can search for courses there too. Meanwhile, if you found this episode useful, then listen to more Future You by following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Or you can go to prospects.ac.uk/podcasts and listen there, and you can also find transcripts of every episode. Finally, you can get in touch with comments, feedback, or suggestions by emailing podcast@prospects.ac.uk. That's all for this episode. Thanks again for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.